Well, boys and girls, welcome to another episode of Rimshots with Sean. And I got to tell you, 2 weeks ago, I said that having this guy on my podcast was a bucket list item. By way of Michael Brandvold, who put me in touch with your publicist, we have the one, the only Mr. Tom Werman. How are you, sir?
Great, great. I'm glad to be here.
Well, I'm glad you're here because first off, before we start, without sounding too cheesy, I do have to thank you because I'm a drummer myself. I'm a musician, and a lot of the albums that you produced in the 80s were what I learned from, and what I stole from and what I borrowed from. So thank you for that because, they're a big part of my upbringing. So, and we'll see where this goes. But so Turn It Up, my time making hit records in the glory days of rock music. So you've been retired since 2001, is that correct?
Yeah, right.
So
retired from the music business, fully retired 3 years ago.
So has this book been kind of pounding around in your head for a number of years? Why now? What makes it the thing to do for you right now?
Well, a few years ago, I saw this very critical review of me, and it wasn't of my records; it was of me.
Yeah,
and I was not happy with it, so I called the blog. I emailed the blog editor and asked him if I could reply or respond, and he said yes. And he and his readers liked my response, so he asked me to write more. And I wound up writing 18 episodes, which turned out to be the model for the book. And that, along with an obviously growing interest in classic rock. There are classic rock stations really in every town in the country. And there's my kids, their kids, and people from 15 to 80 are familiar with the music from the 70s and 80s, and I could channel my parents and say that's because today's music sucks, but I won't do that. I won't do that. That's one of the reasons, and I wanted to tell people why the music I love is great. It's that simple.
Sure. So, and I often ask people this when I do a podcast at the end of it, but I'm going to ask you this now because you talk about the 70s and the 80s and recurrence of this. What do you think this music that you were part of in the 80s and even back, late 70s and whatnot, why do you think it might be as popular or more popular now than it's ever been?
Well, again, I think that it was made by humans and they played real instruments. I think that really has something to do with it. It's alive and it's got mistakes, and sometimes the tempo varies, and sometimes there's a flat or sharp note by a singer. And today, nothing goes wrong. Everything is perfect. Today, when they're making the music, they look at it on a screen, and we listened to it, and I think there's a difference. I listen to certain songs that are 40 years old, and they still do it for me. I can listen to a song that was made recently, for a few weeks, and then it's gone. Its emotional impact just isn't there anymore.
So, and just for anybody that isn't familiar with you, and I don't know who they would be, because people of my vintage, and I just turned 54 in September, but when a lot of your work came out, I was 12 and 13 years old. But Molly Hatchet, Ted Nugent, Poison, Motley Crue, Dawkins, it goes on, it goes on, it goes on.
Yeah.
And you mentioned you kind of get, we'll say, bashed in the media a few years ago or whatever, or I think it was in a book, and I know what book it is, and it doesn't matter. But do you think
there's a couple of them?
Yeah, a couple. But do you think for a period of time it was maybe cool, or it was maybe the in thing to bash Tom Werman? Because you had a great quote that basically says you let everybody hear their mix, but 20 years later, when they didn't get everything they wanted, you were the guy to blame. You were the whipping guy, right? So do you think it was maybe trendy to do that?
Trendy?
Yeah, to bash Tom Werman 25 years after he...
Well, I've rarely heard an artist praise his producer,
Right.
20 years later. I don't know. Every band could have achieved more, except perhaps a few. And it's very convenient to blame their producer, among others, which is one of the reasons that I fortunately had every band approve the final mix before I turned it into the label. So if they did that, really, why are you complaining now? And if you didn't like it, why did you have me do more than one album? They hire you. You're strictly a hired hand as a producer. You are not a boss. You're not a dictator. I tried to be collaborative with them, and I mean, in certain cases, it's pretty. It's kind of logical and explainable why people like Dee Snider, was so incredibly vituperative, accusing me of destroying his 5 million selling album. I don't know how that happens, but he didn't want to take credit. He didn't want me to have any credit because the band was bumping along and doing okay. And then I come along with all my gold and platinum records and I get the credit, some of it, for, making a hit record with them, which set them up for life. And then he just went, I don't understand it. There were other circumstances which contributed to this. In their case, it was the recording engineer who turned out to be a very divisive and deceitful guy. But I don't know what prompted people, musicians, to complain that way. They revise history. They have, they say, well, this didn't happen. I mean, there were things that Nicky said that were just fiction. I really don't understand it because everything was fine then.
Right.
Everything, but they kind of discard you when they're through with you. I did 3 albums with Motley. They became huge as a band. And then when they went to another producer and, they made Dr. Feelgood, which is a great record. They had a record release party about 5 miles from my home and didn't invite me because I wasn't doing anything specific for them that week. And that's the way it is. If you're not helping me, you don't exist.
Well, and I'm not just saying this because we're sitting here talking, but this is going to be as close to a fanboy as I'm going to come in any interview that I've done, and I've almost done 500 of them. But I've watched your quotes, I've watched what you've said about things, and when this came out, and I remember reading Dee's book, and for what it's worth, Dee kind of takes on everybody, so it's like, yeah, you got to take that with a grain of salt. But your answers have always been not spiteful. They've always been classy. To me, they always seem like, you know what, you're throwing it out there just to address it and move on. Whereas maybe some of the other guys and gals maybe kind of just want to get something out of it or get a soundbite. Is that a fair statement?
Well, yeah. I mean, I try to I try to respond in a way that convinces people that it's not logical for these people to be complaining, that what they're, that the way they back up their complaints, or when they say, well, he was this or he was that, I try to it's like proving in court that there's no basis in fact in these allegations, and I really would never, ever have said anything negative about any of these people unless they started it, unless they came forward and said something about me. It's, yeah, I mean, why did I have so many hit records if I wasn't very good?
Well,
if I didn't pay attention.
And there's an awful lot of them, right? I mean, I mean, I don't know if you're the guy that hangs those things on your wall or not, but I mean, like,
no.
I just go do a search of your body of work, and it's like, wow. I mean, you're safe to say you're one of, in that very small group of rock producers that had a lot of success of, an all-time hit maker, right? I'm going to take a little break, and then if we can, I'd like to geek out a little bit with you when we come back in the next segment.
Sure.
All right. We're back with Mr. Tom Werman after this. Well, so welcome back to Rimshots with Sean. I am here with Tom Werman, and I said I wanted to geek out, so I told you I'm a drummer. And I, up here in Canada, when I was growing up, and I had the opportunity to work with record companies and whatnot. In Canada, the replacing of the drummer was almost a thing that was done on a regular basis, right? So it was like if you didn't have your crap together right away, you're out, and it was terrifying. You've worked with some great ones, and I'd be interested to know what you did to work with them from pre-production to studio. Because I mean, I interviewed Mick Brown from Dawkins, and Mick said that he was a red light wonder. Basically, the red light went on, and he got really nervous and what have you. But how did you work with drummers when you were working with them?
It depends on the drummer. With Bunny Carlos, I just smiled and let him go, because he was an incredible drummer who was great as much for what he didn't play as for what he did play. You
named him as your favorite studio drummer. Do you still stand by that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Tommy Lee comes in as a close second. Both of those guys completely positive, completely willing to cooperate. Always, if I said anything, if I suggested something, they would always consider it, probably try it. I was fortunate to work with them. I didn't work with any bad drummers. They were among the most agreeable of all the people in every act that I work with.
So in terms of, and I know like the relationship, well, certainly was with me when I recorded maybe more so the engineer at first getting the sounds and having the patience to kind of get those sounds. And obviously there's a lot of stuff that takes place after in the mix and what have you. But, was there any coaching that you had to do with any of these guys? I don't expect you to name names, but would there be maybe one person that comes to mind, just kind of, without naming the name, that you might have to go, well, you know what, we had to work with this person to really make sure that they got some stuff down?
A little bit. Ricky, in Poison, very, very willing to do whatever he had to do. Good-natured and hard worker. He had a few little hitches, and we worked them out. I would suggest changes in rehearsal, in pre-production. So we'd go into pre-production and we'd take a boombox and I only rehearsed drums, bass, and rhythm guitar, and that was it. And we would change structure, and occasionally I'd say, why don't you do that on the ride instead of the hi-hat, or change that foot drum, that foot pattern. So, it's like this, a little bit different. That's all I would do, really. And then there would be the basic structure of the song that might change. Let's cut that intro in half. Let's put the bridge here instead of here. So that was it. I never really, had to go in and talk to the drummer. Ever. They were good. They were all good and solid. And the way I worked, if you get a good drum track, you're ready to go. Then you just build the pyramid.
Now, and again, this is purely for people that, this isn't a drum podcast, but I'm always fascinated by this stuff. Yeah. Was there a combination of maybe click tracks versus no click tracks versus live off the floor? Like what would your preference be? Would it depend on the player? How did you record it back then? Because I remember reading something with you about when you did Theater of Pain, and you said the drum tracks were done very quickly, and there's some great drumming on that album. So that leads me to believe he was very prepared when he went in there. And, but with something like, how would you approach that, I guess? Case by case?
Well, I didn't like click tracks throughout the record. I never used a click track for the entire the entire track because it was stiff. And anybody, any human will get a little ahead or a little behind of the perfect machine. I liked, and most drummers agreed to use the click track for, the first 20 seconds of the song, maybe. And then as soon as they locked in, I would slowly fade it out. And that would be it. And if it sped up or slowed down, fine. As long as everybody was with the program. They all played together. And I only kept the drums, and then we do the bass, and then we do the rhythm guitar, and so forth. Occasionally, we would splice 2 takes together or 3 parts of each one, and that was fine too. But no problems really.
Well, and I mean, and I held up Dream Police because I've recently been getting into this album again, and I mean, the drumming on this is like what you said. What he plays sometimes versus what he doesn't play is just phenomenal. But to hear you say that was done without a click track blows me away because it's just so. It sounds human. It sounds human.
Well, Bunny is a metronome, and so is Tommy.
Yeah.
They were extremely steady. Kind of like Charlie Watts. Bunny was a minimalist drummer, in a small kit, the whole thing. And Tommy liked to, he was 4 on the floor guy. I really enjoyed working with, with all the drummers. They got all the projects off to a good quick start because we would get the basic tracks pretty quickly.
I'm not going to ask you to name names, sir, because I'm not about that. But in be it a singer or a guitar player, a bass player, a drummer, a keyboard player, is there somebody that to this day, when their name comes up, you just go, ugh, I got what I could out of them, but I'm glad I don't have to work with them again.
Well, yeah. First, I mean the best, basically, I think was Robin Zander.
Mm-hmm.
The toughest was Vince because he was game and worked hard, and came in and did his hours, but he didn't know the meaning of training. He never said, I have to sing tomorrow. I think I'll go to bed now. He did whatever he wanted, and he would party, till the wee hours. And then he'd come in the next day and give it his best, but his best wasn't always what it could have been.
Right.
So I would say he was he was the most challenging.
And this will be, I'll call it our blabbermouth moment here, because this stuff usually gets picked up more than anything else. But, in this day, you'll hear, and I know where it's coming from, but the whole sort of phenomenon of backing tracks, like it's a new thing. I've been telling people, and I remember back in the early 90s and some of the late 80s where backing tracks were used by bands.
You mean on stage?
On live, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Your thoughts on that? Because I mean, obviously, as somebody that's got an ear, and you're probably seeing it, is it a big deal for you? Obviously, it's not a new thing. People think it's a new thing, but you think it's a big deal, or?
I know that bands started to use. Somebody would maybe have an off-stage keyboard guy who played. I don't think it's a terrible thing because. You could go back then in the late 60s and 70s. You could go to a live show and say, what happened to the chorus? What happened to that harmony? Because you had, 6 voices on the record and 2 or 3 on the stage. So I don't know how they did it, but occasionally they would beef up, the backing vocals or the chorus, or they would have people off stage singing. You can't. I mean, especially. I mean, Def Leppard, people with very big, full, backing vocals in the chorus and harmonies and things. When you went to the concert, you'd miss it. The only band who could really reproduce what they recorded was Eagles.
Yeah, that's a fair statement.
Yeah, and one of the problems with that was whether they chose to do it or not. Was basically they would come on stage and sit down and play the album. I know a critic who once accused them of loitering on stage, and they didn't like that, but that's the deal. I actually loved the Eagles live.
Right on. We're going to take one more break. You're a busy guy, so we're going to get through this last segment and get you on to what you need to do, but we'll be back after this. Welcome back to Rimshots with Sean. We are here with the one, the only, Mr. Tom Werman, who actually he just found out was a big part of my musical upbringing. So again, thank you for that, sir.
You're welcome.
I've been watching some of the press on this book, and it comes out soon, like next week. Is that correct?
Correct.
All kinds of different things coming up. You're being asked questions about, Motley, and you're being asked questions about, different sorts of albums. And then you talked about bands that you had presented that you didn't, you found Boston, you found different sorts of guys like that. Is there one that got away that you were just like, that would have been like a real amazing feather in my cap, and we didn't get it?
Yeah. There were 4.
Okay.
By the way, I want to make it clear that I feel I co-signed Boston. The guy who got the first listen was Lenny Pizzi, who was another guy on the A&R staff, and he came down to my office and wanted me to hear it. So we both went to see them live, and for me it was a cooperative venture. Anyway, it wasn't just me.
Well, I believe you said it was the best sounding demo you had ever heard to that.
Oh, without question. Without question. I mean, it was a master.
Right.
It wasn't a demo. And I believe that they took tracks right off that the multi-track tape that Tom Scholes made, and they just transferred them to the master tape in the recording studio and continued with it. Anyway, there were 4 that got away that were eventually enormous. And that was Kiss and Rush and Leonard Skinner. And then much later in 1982, it was Whitney. And I urged enthusiastically my boss to sign them, the 3 of them at Epic Records, and then Whitney at Elektra Records. The president of Elektra Records turned her down, and the A&R head at Epic Records turned the first 3 down. I probably would have been king of the world if they had signed them all.
You did pretty well, though, sir. You did pretty well. I mean, you had a run there where pretty much everything that you worked on, gold, platinum, multi-platinum. Is there one record of all of them that you've taken part in that just from the time that you found out you were going to do it till the time it was released, that you go, yeah, that's the one that I'm hanging my hat on, that's got Tom Werman written all over it?
Well, yeah, I think regardless of sales numbers, I think Heaven Tonight or Dream Police, my favorite in terms of, I feel best about my contribution to those 2 albums. I was fairly creative, I think, during that time. And Girls was, was a big album, and it was a kind of the crowning glory for me and Motley Crue. But there weren't that many great songs on it, I feel, you know.
And it's funny, Dream Police, because one of the bands, the cover bands on a plane, and we decided to pick that song up, and I was like, I hadn't heard it in so long, and oh yeah, no problem, easy. And then it gets to that weird spot at the end, and it's like,
right.
And it's funny. I tried it. I was messing it up in rehearsal. I was messing, and then I just said, I'm just going to do it. I'm not going to pull pin. Played it one night, and I got it. That, to me, for a band that's quote unquote a 2-4 band, is a nice little Beatlesque piece of genius writing there.
Yeah, well, Rick wrote some unique stuff, really, quite unusual. They were an unusual band. I think they should have been 5 times bigger than they were, you know. When I listen to anything that I did, which is a rare thing for me, I usually listen to Cheap Trick.
Yeah, it's that album to me. I put it on. I got it. I get this vinyl at the record store, so I apologize. You won't get a cut of it because it was in the used bin. But I put it on, and it's like, my God, you just forget how great that album was. You know.
Yeah, you can.
So this book's coming out next week, and I guess anytime somebody writes a book, you got to go, how much creative licensing is taken versus how much memory do you have to, because I mean, let's talk about our friend Nikki Sixx. I mean, Nikki to me is a great songwriter. Is he a great bass player? I don't know. I've never been around him in that context, but he took a little bit of a rip about the Heroin Diaries, kind of like, how do you remember all that stuff when you were such a mess and what have you? How much of this do you remember that's accurate versus you got to kind of, pull some stuff in and maybe take some creative licensing on it?
No, I really didn't embellish anything. This is exactly the way I remember it happening. Now, memory is fallible, but I did not revise history. Everything in there is exactly as I think it happened. And I could, if we brought it into a courtroom, I could mount a pretty solid defense.
And hopefully you'll never have to do that. But with all the story, and I mean, so how many pages will this book be, Tom?
I think it's about 230.
So that's a good read. I mean, you could.
It's a good read. People say it's an easy read.
Yeah.
Which is nice. It's only partially autobiographical, just about how I became unable to resist music, and how I made a mistake in terms of career and then fixed it. But it's informative. There's a lot of how we signed, how we found artists, how we monetized artists, how we promoted artists, and especially how we recorded them, how records were made on analog magnetic tape in that time. All those wonderful songs that we hear were, it was kind of primitive.
And it's, I did my research on this, and some people may not know you're an MBA as well.
Yes, I am for what it's worth. Yes, I am.
But that's an accomplishment in itself, because that's a tough thing to do. Is there going to be anybody that reads this book that's going to go, like, do you think anybody's quaking right now, waiting for this book to come out, and then they read it and they're going to be a little maybe miffed that Tom took a shot at me, or is there going to be any of that taking place?
Doubtful, except for Dee Snider.
So you address that.
Yeah. There's another chapter at the end which details all the pain I had trying to reinvent myself in the record business and stop producing, but be a kind of a jack of all trades, a fix-it guy for a label. Trying to sell that idea was really difficult. People like record company presidents were rude, callous. It's like, you haven't done anything for me this week. I don't care. I won't return your phone. I don't care. They weren't evil, but they were just not polite. not ethical. And I don't name names.
Yeah.
And I did that mostly because I didn't want to get sued. I didn't want anybody to say, he said that happened. It didn't happen, because there's no way to prove what happened. So I didn't name names then. And I didn't say very much negative about anybody. I tried to concentrate on the positive.
Yeah, and isn't it funny now that you keep seeing people seem to lawyer up, and there's this lawsuit for this and a lawsuit for that, and obviously, it's kind of sad what's happening with Motley Crue right now and what have you. But did this business? I know you and your wife bought a bed and breakfast up in Massachusetts, and you sold it a few years back. But would the business have been the reason why you decided to say, you know what, enough of this? I'm going to try something else. I'm going to get some peace and quiet. I saw pictures of the place; it looked fantastic. Would that have had a part of your decision in doing that?
Well, I was burnt out.
Yeah.
52 albums. It's a tremendous amount of time spent in the recording studio in a windowless room. I had it, and also, I mean, quite honestly, I was out of favor, and I didn't love the music that the '90s produced. I was very heavily attached, by reputation to corporate rock, to hard rock, and any self-respecting band from Seattle in the early '90s could not possibly have used me as a producer, because you're using the guy who produced Motley Crue, really?
Right.
It would damage their street cred. So I was ready to get out. I saw the writing on the wall early on in the '90s, and by the time we were finished, I just wasn't in demand. You rise, you peak, and you fall. And I wrote about the decline. It's there. There's a chapter called "The Decline." So. I was ready for something else, and this something else is something I could do and really enjoyed doing. I'm obsessed by my immediate environment.
Well, I can feel your pain on the decline, because we talked, and you've never been to Halifax, but what happened for some weird reason? Sub Pop Records, that was in Seattle, came to Halifax and started signing bands out here, and there was a number of bands that got signed. 3 or 4 weeks as a band and getting signed to Sub Pop and putting records out. And, I was in a band that wasn't that. We were used to hearing, we'd love to have you play our club, but you can play. That's not what we want. So I feel your pain. But it's interesting because now, like we said in the first segment, like it just really seems with the Monsters of Rock cruises and, all these things, this it's not going to go away. People are researching it again. I have a theory that, I've got kids, and my kids grew up listening to this stuff, and now they like it because they heard it in their own lives, right?
Right. Yeah. I was at the gym last week, and there was a high school girl there with an Iron Maiden T-shirt, and I said, "How did you weren't born when Iron Maiden was playing and traveling?" And she said, "Well, my dad loved this music, and I grew up with it because he played it all the time." And that's what's happened, really. And it's endured. Thank goodness.
It is. And I think you're going to have a great run with this book. So how can my viewers get their mitts on this book? And I know it's out. Is it the 19th that it's out?
The 21st. It comes out. It should be in bookstores. You can pre-order it on Amazon easily.
Okay.
Yeah. Just Google Turn It Up and my name, and there it is.
And so this book is going to come out, and you're doing your media now, and you'll have a bunch of other media, and then you're going to put your feet up for a while and just enjoy life finally, or what's in the works for Mr. Tom Werman?
I actually have another book in mind, which has nothing to do with music. It was really a lot of fun writing this, so I enjoy writing, and, I can do anything now because I'm retired, and it's a new thrill.
Absolutely. Well, look, I want to thank you so much for doing this. And like I said, third time, this is the closest I'm going to be to a fanboy, but, talking to a man that, who had a hand in such, an impact on my sort of journey to actually decide I was going to start playing an instrument, right. An honor, a pleasure. Be well, and thank you so much.
Hey, thank you. It's been great, really.
Thanks a lot, kids. We'll see you next time.